For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage, fathers of time, daughters of dust, and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy, brothers of love, lovers of life, and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth, keepers of faith, makers of peace, and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage, fathers of time, daughters of dust, and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy, brothers of love, lovers of life, and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are one.
Good morning. I'm going to now recite a poem by Rachel Carson called The Edge of the Sea. To stand at the edge of the sea, to sense the ebb and flow of the tides, to feel the breath of the mist moving over the great salt marsh, to watch the flight of the shorebirds who have swept up and down the surf lines of the continents for untold thousands of years, to see the running of the old eels and the young shad to the sea, is to have the knowledge of things that are as nearly eternal as any earthly life can be. Rachel Carson.
The chalice will now be lit in the sanctuary. If you have inspired by love, our mission is to seek our true nature, connect deeply and openly, and act for justice. You will now be treated to another musical video. It is also from this year's General Assembly, from their Sunday service, and it is called Tomorrow.
The title of my talk this morning is I Am Suffering from Climate Grief, Even in the Middle of this Pandemic. Somewhat of a downer, you would say. Anyone who has lost something, of value has experienced grief. Those who help people after this loss know that we humans express this grief in a myriad of different ways. I have sort of withdrawn into myself and have decided to do little things like plant and take care of plants during this period of grief. Sort of selfish, yep, probably, but I need this to salve my soul. I tried to work out my feelings with the community I love via the Green Sanctuary, but have learned it's just a microcosm of the larger world of people who voice one thing but have a hard time acting. Other more important things seem to get in the way of action. We see this with the pandemic. The pandemic, in my mind, has brought to light many of the same issues that make solving climate change out front and center. What does our world value? For the pandemic, are we willing to give up some of our freedoms to keep people safe? Are we willing to pay what it takes so that everyone has a place to live and food to feed their families? The same applies to climate change. Are we willing to give up some of those conveniences and extravagances that modern society offers? Are we willing to help all those climate change refugees find a place to live and provide for their families? Who are the people most affected by COVID-19? Those who have to work today in order to exist. Similar to all those refugees across the globe whose worlds have become uninhabitable because of climate change, who have to move in order to survive. We have suddenly put value on the workers in the grocery store, sanitation, and the various different levels of the health industry. Nursing homes were particularly hard hit by COVID-19, but those poorly paid health workers in nursing homes were not provided proper protection, nor were the residences. One reason is because they were and are not valued. They don't drive our consumption-oriented world economy. They are not listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Another observation about a third of our workers who lost jobs during this pandemic and spent many hours trying to get unemployment were mostly in the service industry, like restaurants and retail, mostly poorly paid jobs. Again, and not very valued by our society. Does it say something about our ethics and our values that a third of our workforce is in this bracket now? Have we lost our souls to consumerism? The same consumerism that is depleting our natural resources across the world and destroying homes of the many animals who also live on this earth? During this pandemic, we've had a lot of time in isolation, and some of us have identified things we truly value more than shopping. You may have mentally made a list of priorities, and I hope as you use some values we cherish. Recognizing how much we really like each other, and despite our differences, is one for me. Resilience is another. Are we going to bounce back to what our lives were before? Or will we change anything when the pandemic finally ends? Will this change only occur individually? Or will it be society-wide? Some feel this is our opportunity to work on larger problems and not go back to business as usual. How about you? What do you feel? When I was researching material for this sermon, I read about one person who remembered back in the 1980s, which I can do too, when the Cold War with Russia was occurring and we were all wondering if this could be our last day on Earth because of nuclear destruction. The following question came up. If the bomb falls tomorrow, is there something so valid about living this way that we would live this way anyway? You could say the same thing about climate change. What in our present day world is so valuable that we could not give it up despite that it is contributing to climate change? For me, electricity, we've learned recently when all the power went out that living without electricity is very difficult. Technology is working now to provide us with electricity that harms the earth less, and also conservation and devices that use less electricity. There are answers to that problem. In another article about climate change, grief, the audience was divided into two groups. One group was those in the present, 2020, and the other group was 200 years into the future, 7 generations, and 2220. The group in 2220 asked of us, their ancestors, I heard stories about the critical time you lived in, how much of a crisis the world was in. What was it like for you to live with that knowledge every day? You must have felt confused and lonely at the beginning. How did you get started in helping the world to heal? You must have felt scared and discouraged throughout it. Where did you find the strength to continue? Notice the compassion in these questions. Notice how they apply both to the pandemic and to climate change. Notice that somehow Earthlings must have found a solution. The author came to this conclusion: none of us singly created climate change or the pandemic. Both were created in the short view of time, a view that expects immediate gratification and quick fixes, a view that can't fully comprehend the consequences of our choices beyond our own lifetimes. Climate change is not going to be solved during most of our lifetimes. However, it won't be solved or ameliorated unless we do act now. The effects are now. Some say it's too late and we are cruising down to destruction. Some say we have to work fast over the next 10 years to turn the curve. With this pandemic, we have all come to understand curves. If we act now with climate change, we can flatten the curve, not in 2 months, but maybe over the next 10 years. The crisis is no longer about changing the kind of light bulbs of the car you drive. It has to become a worldwide priority. We have to shift away from an industrial growth-based industry to a society that sustains all life on Earth. Even those service workers who continue to work and supply us with our needs, but also those unseen little organisms that provide us with oxygen. That's another thing I wouldn't want to do without. Clean water and soil that sustains us. Did you know that 50 to 70% of our oxygen on Earth comes from phytoplankton in the ocean? But they're being threatened too. The ocean is a large sink for CO2, and it's becoming more and more acid, forming carbonic acid, endangering the life of these phytoplankton. These phytoplankton provide more oxygen than all the tropical forests. The philosopher, spiritual leader Joanna Macy says, passive hope is about waiting for external agencies to bring about what we desire. Active hope is about becoming an active participant in what we hope for. Active hope is a practice. It is something we do rather than have. There is a very insightful teenager, Greta Thunberg, who says the longer we keep pretending that we are on a reliable path to lower emissions and that the actions required to avoid a climate disaster are available within today's system, or for that matter, that we can solve crises without treating it like one, the more precious time we lose. Many of you don't feel particularly threatened by climate change and do not see how it is connected to the many other social justice issues that Unitarians work so hard on. I invite you to see how lobbying for a Green New Deal is much more far-reaching than just our carbon footprints. During this time of change, are we going to go back to what it was before? Are we going to start living differently? Watch this cute little short video shown at this year's UUA General Assembly to understand better how we can do what we can do and to take some of the steps to that hopeful future.
The bullet train from New York to DC. It always brings me back to when I first started making this commute. In 2019, I was a freshman in the most diverse Congress in history. Up to that point, it was a critical time. I'll never forget the children in our community. They were so inspired to see this new class of politicians who reflected them, navigating the halls of power. It's often said, you can't be what you can't see. And for the first time, they saw themselves. I think there was something similar with the Green New Deal. We knew that we needed to save the planet and that we had all the technology to do it, but people were scared. They said it was too big, too fast, not practical. I think that's because they just couldn't picture it yet. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with how we got here. 1977, New York. A senior scientist named James Black made a presentation about how burning fossil fuels could eventually lead to global temperatures rising 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Within 2 years, one of the world's biggest supertankers was outfitted with a state-of-the-art lab to measure CO2 in the ocean, gathering more data about global warming. Guess who was doing all of this research? ExxonMobil, the oil and gas company. Oh yeah, Exxon knew this whole time, as did our politicians. 10 years later, James Hansen, NASA's top climate scientist, told Congress he was 99% certain that global warming was happening and caused by humans. That was 1988, the year before I was even born. So did Exxon listen to the science, including their own? Did they change business models, invest in renewables? No, the opposite. They knew and they doubled down. They and others spent millions setting up a network of lobby groups and think tanks to create doubt and denial about climate change. It was an effort designed to attack and dispute the very kind of science they themselves had been doing. And it worked. Politicians went to bat for fossil fuels, and these massive corporations kept digging and mining, drilling and fracking like there was no tomorrow. America became the biggest producer and consumer of oil in the world. Fossil fuel companies made hundreds of billions, while the public paid the lion's share to clean up their disasters. We lost a generation of time we'll never get back. Entire species will never get back. Natural wonders gone forever. And in 2017, Hurricane Maria destroyed the place where my family was from, Puerto Rico. It was like a climate bomb. It took as many American lives as 9/11. And in the next year, when I was elected to Congress, the world's leading climate scientists declared another emergency. They told us that we had 12 years left to cut our emissions in half, or hundreds of millions of people would be more likely to face food and water shortages, poverty, and death. 12 years to change everything. How we got around, how we fed ourselves, how we made our stuff, how we lived and worked, everything. The only way to do it was to transform our economy, which we already knew was broken, since the vast majority of wealth was going to just a small handful of people, and most folks were falling further and further behind. It was a true turning point. Lots of people gave up. They said we were doomed. But some of us remembered that as a nation, we'd been in peril before. The Great Depression, World War II. We knew from our history how to pull together to overcome impossible odds. And at the very least, we owed it to our children to try. The wave began when Democrats took back the House in 2018, and then the Senate and the White House in 2020, and launched the decade of the Green New Deal, a flurry of legislation that kicked off our social and ecological transformation to save the planet. It was the kind of swing-for-the-fence ambition we needed. Finally, we were entertaining solutions on the scale of the crises we faced without leaving anyone behind. That included Medicare for All, the most popular social program in American history. We also introduced the federal jobs guarantee, a public option including dignified living wages for work. Funnily enough, the biggest problem in those early years was a labor shortage. We were building a national smart grid, retrofitting every building in America, putting trains like this one all across the country. We needed more workers. That group of kids from my neighborhood were right in the middle of it all, especially this one girl, Ileana. Her first job out of college was with AmeriCorps Climate, restoring wetlands and bayous in coastal Louisiana. Most of her friends were in her union, including some oil workers in transition. They took apart old pipelines and got to work planting mangroves with the same salary and benefits. Of course, when it came to healing the land, we had huge gaps in our knowledge. Luckily, indigenous communities offered generational expertise to help guide the way. Ileana got restless, tried her hand as a solar plant engineer for a while, but eventually made her career in raising the next generation as part of the Universal Child Care Initiative. As it turns out, caring for others is valuable, low-carbon work, and we started paying real money to folks like teachers, domestic workers, and home health aides. Those were years of massive change, and not all of it was good. When Hurricane Sheldon hit southern Florida, parts of Miami went underwater the last time. But as we battled the floods, fires, and droughts, we knew how lucky we were to have started acting when we did. And we didn't just change the infrastructure, we changed how we did things. We became a society that was not only modern and wealthy, but dignified and humane too. By committing to universal rights like healthcare and meaningful work for all, we stopped being so scared of the future. We stopped being scared of each other, and we found our shared purpose. Ileana heard the call too, and in 2028, she ran for office in the first cycle of publicly funded election campaigns. And now she occupies the seat that I once held. I couldn't be more proud of her, a true child of the Green New Deal. When I think back to my first term in Congress, riding that old school Amtrak in 2019, all of this was still ahead of us. And the first big step was just closing our eyes and imagining it. We can be whatever we have the courage to see.
So for myself, when I'm feeling down, I found that my best medicine is to action. So please start acting today. In order to give you a chance to act and give you some ideas, I'm inviting you to have the privilege of listening to Shandu, wish you were here, who is the CEO of Utopus Insights, a software company in the renewable energy space. Prior to co-founding Utopus Insights, Shandu was a fellow at the IBM Research, where he led a worldwide smart energy and environmental science team. He is the founding board member of Croton 100, a community-based environmental not-for-profit. He lives a low-carbon lifestyle in a zero-carbon home in Croton-on-Hudson. Shandu holds a PhD in computer engineering from Carnegie Mellon University.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. Can someone give me a thumbs up that you can hear me and see the screen as well? Thank you, Anne. Appreciate that. The title of my presentation is Turning Climate Grief into Climate Joy. Thank you, Daria, for that very eloquent presentation. It's very easy to feel climate grief. We see new news that's not good news in the papers every day. It's overwhelming, it's complex. At the same time, we feel a personal responsibility to do something about this. And as Daria said, the only way to combat grief is to do something about it. So let me start with a brief quote. It is in those very moments when everything looks hopeless that we have a real chance to grow into something better. What the caterpillar calls the end of the world, we call a butterfly. This is a quote variously attributed to Lao Tzu, who's the founder of Taoism, and Richard Bach, the author of Jonathan Livingston Seagull and Illusions. Our butterfly here locally is called Croton 100. So what is the purpose of Croton 100? Quite simply, it is to maximize climate joy, to do something about this problem and feel like we're making progress and feel the joy that comes from taking steps in our own lives. We are an environmental not-for-profit. We are community-based grassroots. The whole spirit of the organization is neighbors influencing neighbors, and all of us taking personal responsibility to reduce carbon emissions. The 100 in the name Croton 100 means that we want to touch everyone's life. All our residents, all the emissions that we create, all the businesses in our zip code, etc. So basically, we want to make Croton the climate joy capital of the world, if you will. How are we going to do this? One of the themes in Croton 100 is a step-down plan. And you cannot solve big problems in one fell swoop. We need little steps that we can take in order to get to the solution. So we all understand that today there's a certain level of carbon emissions. Turns out that in Croton-on-Hudson per person, we are emitting about 20 tons of carbon dioxide per year. And we all understand that we need to cut that in half by 2030. You saw that in the video. And we need to get to net zero by 2040. This is the urgent imperative published by the United Nations. And so our mission is really just very simple. We want to walk down the carbon ladder 5% per year over 20 years to achieve net zero by the year 2040. Very simply stated mission, a quantified amount of carbon reduction, 5% per year for the next 20 years. So we are zip code 10520. That's the 20 steps per year to get us to zero emissions, 5% per year. So how are we going to do this? It's, again, a very simple, personalized step down that each of us will have to live through in order to achieve net zero. Now, I'll walk you through this very briefly, and I will suggest to you that every little step we take in this step down journey brings climate joy. I have lived this for the last 12 years and achieved a very low or even negative carbon lifestyle. And you're welcome to ask me in the Q&A how that happened and what kind of joy that generates. But quite simply, we can start with electricity. This is the easiest thing in the world to decarbonize. You either sign up for a green electricity supply company, or you sign up for community solar, or you put solar on your roof or your backyard. There is no excuse anymore for any carbon emissions coming from our electricity use. The next thing we have to tackle is transportation, and we all understand we need to invest in more efficient vehicles, move to hybrid vehicles where possible, plug-in hybrids, and ultimately electric vehicles. And it has been proven that the new generation of electric vehicles give you a lower total cost of ownership over the life cycle of the car. Heating and cooling is the next big one, where we need to move away from our oil and gas furnaces and towards heat pumps, most likely air source heat pumps, which again will save us money after we make the initial investment. If we can take those three major steps in this decade, we're doing really well. We're halfway to the answer. You'll see that we're down to about 6 or 7 tons per person, and everything in this graph is national averages. The next thing we have to tackle is food and waste. Try to have more of a plant-based diet, reduce food waste, recycle, compost, eliminate single-use plastic. Goods and services is a big one. We already talked about consumerism. More importantly, buy local, divest your investments from fossil fuel funds. And finally, the green bar there is a zip code overhead, which is that in every zip code there are public buildings and facilities, the schools, the houses of worship, etc. And we need to convince them as well to take this step down journey. All of these steps will bring us down to somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 tons per person, and that's in the range where some simple offsets will bring us truly to net zero. Now, each of these 7 major steps has sub-steps within it, and so in transportation or in heating and cooling, there are little steps that we can take, and simple, easy steps that we can guide people through to walk down this carbon ladder and get to net zero. And we have 20 years to do this, every single one of us. To help everyone with this, we have developed a piece of software. This is an app or an application It'll run on your mobile phone or in any browser, and it's called the Carbon Tracker. What the Carbon Tracker does is ask you a few simple questions. What kind of car do you drive? What kind of furnace do you have to heat your home? How many miles do you drive every year? How many flights do you take every year? What kind of diet do you have? And it will give you your personalized carbon footprint. Now, all of us know our age, our date of birth, our social security number. We should know our carbon footprint. You cannot reduce something that you do not measure. And so what this little software will do in a very easy and intuitive way is give you a personalized carbon footprint for your household. And not only that, it will compare it to the zip code average for each of these sources of carbon, like transportation, heating, electricity, and so on. So you can see how you're doing against your neighbors. Not only will it give you a quantified carbon footprint, it's a forward-looking tool. It will allow you to plan your future improvements and make a My Carbon plan for the future on how you're going to step down to 50% carbon by the year 2030. Best of all, we found some real climate joy recently by finding a way to make this scalable and replicable to any zip code in the United States. So today, this carbon tracker can be used for any zip code in the US. Now, in addition to Croton 100 being focused just on Croton, we have had tremendous interest from neighboring towns to affiliate and work with us. And in about a month or so, we will be launching something called Cure 100, which stands for Communities United to Reduce Emissions 100%. And Croton 100, Yorktown 100, Putnam 100, Ardsley 100 will be chapters or affiliates of Cure 100. And possibly we will expand even beyond New York State. So the purpose of setting up Cure 100 is to allow communities to really focus on decarbonization campaigns and not worry about things like not-for-profit status and insurance and software development and so on. We will provide collateral material, website help, social media help, campaigns, know-how, so that local communities can quickly focus on what matters most, which is decarbonization. So let me end by a call to action. I would invite everybody in this congregation to visit our website at croton100.org. In there are several tabs. One of the tabs is a pledge tab, and I invite all of you to take the pledge. It is a simple statement that says, I care about carbon and I will take steps to reduce carbon and I will influence my neighbors to reduce carbon. Use our carbon tracker to understand your own carbon footprint. We also run office hours on Thursday evenings where through a Zoom call like this one, we walk participants through the use of the carbon tracker and how to make a 10-year plan to cut your carbon in half. See all of the campaigns that we are running in the campaigns tab. We have everything from community solar to encouraging electric vehicles to turning people into CCA or community choice aggregation for their electricity, et cetera, et cetera. Subscribe to our weekly blog. Just a week ago, the topic of the blog was the moral imperative for us to live a negative carbon lifestyle. Help us by making a donation. Your money will be used well, as it will be when you donate to the Universalist Church or to the NAACP of Ossining and Peekskill. Come to our community meetings. We meet on the third Monday of each month at 7 p.m. virtually these days. Ask your community to join Cure 100 if you live outside of Croton. And above all, begin or continue your personal step-down journey towards net zero or climate joy. And as Gandhi would say, be the change that you wish to see in this world. Thank you, and let me turn it back to you. We can't hear you, Daria.
I urge you to join Shandu at the after the coffee hour, or it's really a coffee half hour, for a Q&A session where you can ask him any questions. Hopefully you could hear that. I wasn't, and now we're going on to sharing the plate. Closing words, I'm going to give you some words from Bill McGibbon. The earth is a museum of divine intent, and very few people on earth ever get to say, I'm doing right now the most important thing I could possibly be doing. If you join this fight, that's what you get to say. We are going to have a final hymn. It's one of our favorites, and I hope everybody will sing along on their own. Blue Boat Home.